Alex was trying to get down from the building. She woke up at a large desk that looked like it used to belong to a CEO. She was wearing a gray suit with a red tie. She had no memories when she woke up, not even of her name. She got the name from the name tag on the desk. There wasn't anything else on the desk, so it seemed as good of a name as any other for herself. There were no papers, no pencils, and no computer on the desk. The drawers were empty. It didn't even have dust. The windows led out to a distant city. The lights were on in the street, and some of the windows also, but still the city felt empty, like a shop that was about to close. There was no movement down below, and no noise could be heard, and no one could be seen. This made the city beautiful in a macabre way. The shroud, where the stars should have been, was a deep blue, almost black. No sunlight could be seen, nor any stars, nor any moon. But the lights of the city below twinkled instead, like all the stars of the heavens were taken down and placed on the earth. Still, a feeling of icy fear stabbed into Alex's back. A feeling that she was somewhere she didn't belong, and would get caught if she remained where she was. That didn't make any sense. Other than the desk and the chair, the office was bare, and the carpets were the rough corporate carpets that were always easy to clean, but not easy to walk on. The carpet was also spotless. It looked like it was never walked on. No worn-out spots, no impressions, no anything. Even moving the desk by a few inches showed there was no impressions from the desk to the carpet. It all looked like it might as well have been set up today. However, it didn't smell like a fresh office. There didn't seem to have any distinct smell at all. No smell of paint, no smell of coffee, or of ink, or of rust, or iron, or even the comforting smell of old papers. Looking out the window again, Alex saw herself in the reflection. She had no distinct memories before she woke up here, so her face was as much of a surprise to her as her surroundings. Her reflection showed a petite, black-haired woman. She was wearing tan pants and a brown shirt with a red tie that she didn't realize she was wearing earlier. Wasn't she wearing gray just a little earlier? Her eyes were a sea green that seemed to have flecks of gold inside of it. Her smile was ordinary, and around her neck, interestingly, was a chain. At the end of the chain was a locket. Lifting the locket up to her face, she opened it to see what was inside. On one side of the locket was a mirror showing her face, and on the other side was a small picture of a woman's face. Not her own face, but if this woman's face was in her locket, clearly she was important to Alex. Her face was rounder than Alex's, and she was smiling and looked like she was in mid-laugh. Her hair was deep royal purple and shaved on one side of her head. Looking at the image, Alex felt a longing for the woman. Something that went even deeper than memory, as far as she could tell. She could imagine herself sitting on a bench with this woman and looking over a cliff into the ocean. She could almost smell the salt water and hear the calling of the seagulls. A woman's warmth against her side, and then her voice. Alex couldn't imagine the woman's voice. She couldn't even imagine the words. But her heart was definitely aching to be with the purple-haired woman. She must have been important to Alex. Maybe a best friend, or a girlfriend, or maybe even a wife. Shaking her head and pulling back to the now of reality, Alex closed her locket, and the snap seemed louder than it should have been. Looking back at the room, she saw 3 walls, 1 door, and 1 set of windows instead of a wall. Alex tried opening the door, and it wouldn't open. The door was locked seemingly on the outside, and traveling back to the desk, she moved the name tag to see if maybe there was a key or something underneath. Instead, she found that there was an arrow etched into the bottom of her name tag. The arrow was pointing at the chair she was sitting in. Now curious, she turned over the chair and saw that a hatchet was duct taped to the bottom of the chair. Removing the hatchet, Alex heard a soft sucking sound. Gripping the rubber handle, she took a practice swing. It felt like a good, solid swing, and it also felt familiar to her. Her fingers molded well to the hatchet, and her calluses seemed to have been made for it. Lifting the hatchet up to the door, she saw that the door was made of wood and could very likely be cut with the hatchet. Still, her sense of caution told her to see if there was more in the office. Getting beneath her desk, she pushed it over to see if there was anything taped on the bottom. And sure enough, there were 2 envelopes taped onto the bottom. The first envelope was marked Alex, so it had to have been for her, right? Opening the envelope, she saw a plastic ID on a lanyard. The ID had her lanyard on it and a series of numbers and letters. It didn't seem to have a pattern, but it was there. 41, 6C, 65, 78, 20, 4D, 6F, 72, 61, 64, 6F. Not knowing what it meant, Alex still put the lanyard on, figuring it might come in handy to finding out where she was. The other envelope had a key. It was a black key, but otherwise was unremarkable. Trying the door to the office, the key worked. The door opened, and she removed the black key and placed it into her pocket. Thank God her outfit had pockets. The room beyond had an elevator and a door that seemed to lead to a stairway. Trying first the elevator, she pressed the down button. The elevator made a soft dinging noise, and an electronic voice spoke. "Please mind the doors," the voice said. The elevator was a steel utilitarian trap, so it looked like most other elevators. Stepping into the car, she faced the panel with the buttons and saw it only had 2 buttons: open and close doors. There was no option to input the floor, or even an emergency button. Still, she decided it was better than just sitting in the office. Alex let the doors close. As she waited in the elevator, she realized it wasn't moving at all. After 5 minutes in the car not moving, she sighed and pressed the open door button. The doors sighed open. The world beyond the elevator was dark and different from where she was before. The lobby had big glass windows that led to the city, and the lobby also had lights above in small alcoves, but the lights were on low, making the lobby just visible, but not very clear. Stepping forward, Alex stepped through the doors. The doors behind her closed with a ding. Turning around, she could see the elevator doors, but with them closed, there was no button on the door, and no way to call the elevator back. Even though she wanted to be away from the office that she woke up in, it still felt like she was stepping away from somewhere, and if it was not home, then she was stepping away from somewhere familiar to her. Holding her hatchet in her left hand, she continued to explore the lobby. The front desk was as pristine as the desk above. No papers, no computer, and no dust. However, what she did find in the chair was a security satchel. It was marked with the white word "security" on black canvas. Opening the bag, she found nothing inside. However, there was a slight smell to the bag. It smelled faintly of fresh baked bread. The smell made her stomach growl. Alex was hungry. It felt like she had never eaten anything at all before in her life. Checking again in the bag and still seeing nothing, yet again, she put her hatchet in, and then continuing to the windows on the front, she saw outside. Just outside there was a bakery and a cafe across from where she was. The lights were on, and it looked like there was something on the counter. Walking to the lobby door, she tried to open it, but the glass doors refused to budge. Next to the door was a gray sensor. On a hunch, she placed her ID card on the sensor. The red light turned green, and she was able to push the door open. Finally, outside, Alex took a deep breath. The air smelled so clean, cleaner than she thought air could smell like. No smog, no trash. It smelled like it freshly rained, but there was no moisture on the cement or on the buildings. The lights glowed much brighter than the lobby lights. They were 20 feet apart from each other, glowing a bright blue-white color. No buzzing, and oddly enough, no insects or moths flying around. Approaching the bakery, Alex stared through the window to look at the food within. On the basket was a plate of warm rolls. Going through the bakery door, a slight ringing was heard from the bell over the door. The bell rang, informing the owners of customers. However, there were no owners, and Alex wasn't sure she counted as a customer. She didn't have a wallet to pay for anything, and she wasn't even sure if money was needed to take a roll. Reaching for a roll, she had a dim thought of a story. Stories about the dangers of consuming the food of the underworld or consuming food of fairies, because if you did, then you would become their prisoner. Normally, she wouldn't think twice about such a story, but it becomes a lot more of a sinister reminder now that she was in a city that shouldn't exist, with no memories of where she was or who she was. Maybe she was dead. Maybe she was the prisoner of some magical entity confining her to a different dimension. Or maybe she was just crazy and none of this was actually happening. Thoughts about how a city should work flooded her mind. A cafe full of customers and almost empty of employees, but still things flowed and worked. There were people and company, but still the same feeling of loneliness she was feeling now. That no one actually knew each other, but they were other aware beings sharing the same space and doing the same thing, even if they could never, ever really know each other. Well, now Alex didn't even know herself, and she'd trade the roles in front of her for just another person to be around with. Even if that other person never spoke to her, at least having someone around would make things easier to bear. Finally making her decision, she picked up a roll. Lifting it to her mouth, she sniffed it. It didn't smell poisonous or foul, and it seemed to be freshly made. And so chewing on it, the roll tasted fine. So then after chewing on a few rolls, Alex felt much better. Now full up on rolls, she folded the cloth napkin around the remaining rolls and packed it into her security bag on top of her hatchet. Underneath the basket was a note. At first, seeing the note, Alex was excited. Maybe it was a note from someone who made the rolls. Maybe something to explain what was happening, or who she was, or even what city it was. Instead, the note just read, "Please put the basket back in the kitchen when food is gone. Thank you. Management." Now, a bit dejected, Alex put the basket back in the kitchen. Again, the kitchen was as spotless as the city. The sink, pantry, trash can, fridge, and oven were all empty. The oven still had some warmth left, but otherwise there was no evidence that the kitchen was ever used. No ingredients of any kind could be seen anywhere, and no dirt or filth could be seen anywhere. Still, Alex was curious, so she went through the drawers. No knives, cutlery, or implements. Not even pots or pans. Nothing that could be used as a tool or a weapon. At least not until she went into the bottom drawer. In the bottom drawer, she found something unusual. A brochure. Unfolding the brochure, she saw a familiar tower on the front cover. The tower she woke up on was featured on the cover. The brochure referred to it as Little Towers. The brochure also said that the name of the city that the tower was in was called Dys. D-Y-S. The brochure said that the city was designed to be a city of the future, designed to be automated, but also full of all the amenities for modern society, including water, power, sewers, food, and homes for everyone. Other than a list of businesses and a basic roadmap, the brochure didn't offer any other information. Finally closing the brochure, Alex saw something else on the back of it. A picture of the purple-haired woman. She was sitting on a bench in a park with an obelisk in the background, smiling brightly to the camera. Her expression seemed to say she was having fun and she was in a safe place. The brochure didn't say who the woman was, but did say that the place was called Brock Park. The map showed that the park was about 12 blocks away. Alex glanced outside, seeing and evaluating to see if it was safe enough to walk out to the park outside. The streets didn't change at all, and there was still no one outside. So, with her new map in hand and the basket in the kitchen, she called out, hoping whoever had made it for her would hear her. "Thank you for the food and brochure. I'd leave money for you if I could," Alex said. She didn't hear anything, nor see anything, but the air in the room felt warmer and kinder than it did before. It almost felt like the kitchen was pleased with what she said. Taking a cleansing breath, she stepped outside. The cool night air was bracing to Alex's hot skin, but not so cold that it was uncomfortable. The sidewalk was warm, and she could easily walk without feeling cold on her bare feet. At the end of the block, there was no walk signal, but there was also no traffic light, nor a stop sign. It was just an intersection without any of those. The sidewalk was the same height as the road. It was a seamless transition between the two. The only difference was the color of the cement. The storefronts changed each time she walked by them. Toy stores, stationery stores, convenience stores, pizza stores, even grocery stores were all passed, but without the name of the stores, Alex would have never guessed what the stores were supposed to sell. The stores were all empty inside. No products, no shelving, no people, not even any lights inside, making the store feel even emptier than if it was just an empty building with no sign. Finally, she made it to the park. Then she saw the obelisk in the distance. It sat on a hill in the middle of the park. That in the park was about 4 square blocks. Figuring she had no better leads, she traveled to the obelisk to look for the bench. Finally, at the obelisk, Alex read the words inscribed into it. They were etched deep into the stone, and unlike the rest of the city, it was a little alive. There was some moss growing out of the bottom of the stone. It only grew up a few inches, but the growth still felt organic rather than placed. Reading the inscription, Alex saw it read, "To Alex, I dedicate the city of Dis to you. May it always be a warm and inviting place to you, even when the world is a cold and inviting place. The Engineer." Reading the words, Alex felt tears in her eyes. Somewhere in her heart, she felt that this obelisk was dedicated to her, and only her. Not only was the name hers, but the words felt like something she recognized. Somewhere deep in her mind, the words made her thoughts itch, like a snake shedding its skin to reveal a fresh new pattern underneath. Before Alex's eyes, she saw the purple-haired woman sitting on the bench with her. The Alex before her in her imagination was sitting on the bench with a cane on her lap, the purple-haired woman showing her a notebook, diagrams of city blocks and how the streets were designed. The drawing shows a street where the sidewalk and the road were the same height, along with some very explicit notes. Sitting on the ground, trying to get a focus on her memory, trying to make the notes come to focus, Alex only felt her grip on the memory fading. The diagrams became fuzzier, and the book was nothing more than faded paper. Instead, she focused on the purple-haired woman's face. Her face was still as sharp and clear as ever. Alex could feel the woman's hand on her cheek, and a tingle on her lips, and then the memory was gone. Now, just sitting in front of the obelisk, she stared at the words. This time, they felt more like they were mocking her rather than comforting her. This city could be warm and comforting. There was no warmth here. There was no comfort here. How was this city meant to be a safe place in the world? And yet it felt so lonely now. Sitting there, Alex saw something else at the base of the obelisk. Held down by a single rock, it was face down and white, like a paper. Or maybe another brochure? Pulling it out, she saw it was another photo. Looking like it came out of a Polaroid, it showed a home with a garden in front of it. Nothing very special about it. It looked like any other home that could be in the suburb of any other city. Still, it felt familiar, like she saw it before. Her mind was getting an itchy feeling again, but this time there was no memory associated with it. Just a feeling that this was home. On the picture, there was a word underneath the house. The Hermitage. Not sure what it meant, Alex looked at the back of the photo, hoping for more of a hint, and saw an address. 1500 East West Street. Looking again just to make sure she was reading it correctly, she saw that it did indeed say East West Street. Well, that didn't make a whole lot of sense to have an East-West Street. Still, an address could help if she could find it on her map. Her heart fluttered in her chest like a trapped bird behind her ribs. It felt like it was telling her to be careful. The house might be dangerous, or something else was making her anxious. Or maybe it was all a trap. Still, she pushed down the fear to examine the map on her brochure. She found that the street she was on was West Street, and if she followed it past the park, it would turn into East West Street. Doing the math in her head, on average every block would be about 100 on the address, so if she was 4 blocks away from East West Street, then another 15 blocks was maybe 19 blocks away. So she could make it there soon. Putting the brochure and photo away, and then lifting a roll to her mouth, she began her walk to the house. The park was large, taking up 4 city blocks. Luckily, there was a water fountain nearby, so Alex could drink. The cold water felt refreshing, but oddly enough, didn't seem uncomfortable. Normally, cold water on a cold night created a frigid pain in her teeth and throat. But now, it only felt refreshing. Taking another breath, she looked over the park. The grass was green, as it could be, and cut into patterns to make it look like a chessboard. Lighter patches of green and darker patches of green, all of equal size, and more than large enough that each patch could have a picnic without touching any other people. There was a calm in the park. No crickets, nor anything called, but Alex could feel the breeze blow past her. The breeze carried the smell of freshly mown grass. Still, seeing no one else in the park but the lights from the lamps kept the park surprisingly well lit. There wasn't anywhere for anyone, or anything to hide, and the park looked like it was made for people to relax in. If only there was sunlight streaming down. Maybe not on a fully sunny day, but have enough of a cloud cover to mute the sun's light, to keep the grass dry and the air warm, without being too bright would be perfect. Wait. Alex blinked her eyes and shook her head. Why was she thinking in those terms? A sunny day that wasn't sunny was a perfect day? Wasn't a perfect day supposed to be clear and the sun shining down? Lots of people around and hot enough to feel the sunlight on her skin? And yet the thought of such a situation made her feel like her head was aching. Like a pounding sensation behind her eyes was spreading through her forehead, then through her head, and then to the back of her neck. It felt like a mix of intense migraine and stress headache rolled into one. How could she be feeling this? All she was doing was thinking about about a large group of people and a sunny day. And yet in her mind she could see the park was crowded with people, and the sun beating down. Even though it was just a thought, she could feel it on her skin. The people being so close, it made her feel itchy, like people were constantly touching her or waiting to touch her. The sun was too bright, and the light made it hard for her to think and see. The heat made her sweat, and her clothes clung to her skin. A stream of thoughts flowed through her mind. Was she smelling bad? Could people see her sweating? Were people touching her, or was it just in her mind? People were talking and yelling and screaming. She kept trying to focus on every conversation at the same time. It felt like echoing in her mind, and every echo was a completely different word. The sensation made her feel like she was taking in too much too fast. Finally, the image faded back to the dark and cool setting of the here and the now. All the thoughts and anxieties seemed to drip away as the strong sunlight was reduced into soft street lights. People's chattering reduced to a gentle silence, and the crowded park into empty streets. Alex took her deep breaths and finally got back up and continued her walk to the house. As she got closer to the hermitage, her anxiety and fear reduced more and more, till it was nothing more than a memory. The city seemed more comforting now. It was quiet and empty, but it also wasn't painful. The lights allowed her to see without overloading her eyes. The lack of buzzing or talking prevented her from getting the mind echoes. Compared to what she saw in her vision earlier, the empty chill of Dis was a more welcome embrace than a city full of people. Finally, at the house, she saw a light on the inside. Reaching the door, she tried to open it, and it was locked. Taking out her black key, she put it in the lock, and it worked. Stepping inside, she could feel the warmth. Not just physical warmth, a warmth of her heart that made it feel like this was the best place to be. The house felt more familiar than any other place. The carpet was soft and fluffy, and the smell was like a scented candle named after some obscure emotion or action. She couldn't place the name, but it was a comfort. Following the scent of the candle, she saw the purple-haired woman sitting at a desk. The lamp was on and focused on what she was sketching. Above the purple-haired woman's head was a name tag similar to Alex's. The name tag was dark blue with white letters. Moredo Royal was the name on the tag. Alex mouthed the word silently and then said it out loud. Hearing the name made all the pieces tick into place. Everything flooded back to Alex now, and yes, her name was Alex. She was very sick, and she was dying over several years. Moredo was her girlfriend and was helping take care of her, taking her to new places like the cliffs over the ocean to see the world below. That was where the picture was taken. Moredo later gave Alex the locket with her picture and mirror, so Alex could always find herself, no matter how bad things got. But Alex kept getting sicker. She couldn't walk without a cane. Her hypersensitivity got worse. People were overstimulating before her illness, and after the illness it got much worse. Alex could only interact with a few people at a time, and usually only in dim places. She could hardly go anywhere, and she used to love going out with Moredo so much. But Moredo didn't give up. She sought to design a city where Alex could heal, a city where the air was always clean, where the sun didn't shine too bright, the roads were easy to walk, and her senses could finally relax. Moredo finished the city while Alex was in her cot in the hospital. One of Moredo's last acts would be taking Alex to the park. Alex sat on the bench, her heart barely beating, but still full of love for Moredo. Moredo then took Alex to the obelisk, where Alex touched the stone, and then she woke up in the tower, in the middle of the city. It was all for her. Moredo just wanted to give Alex another chance to live on as the city of Dis. Alex was Moredo's muse and inspiration, and now she wanted her to live on, to use the city, to keep protecting others. Alex was now Dis, and Dis was now her. And they couldn't exist apart anymore. She was now the very thing designed to comfort and protect her. Now she could live on as that city. Alex, now remembering everything, approached Moredo, gently tapping Moreto's shoulder and giving her a hug, watching her sketch out more plans for the city. It looked like a train network. Moreto's sketches were as beautiful as ever. However, there were a few wet spots. She was crying over her sketch. Alex, wanting to comfort her girlfriend, began to whisper to her. Moredo was sitting at her desk. Alex was gone, taken to the obelisk where her spirit would live on forever, protecting the city. Moredo knew it was for the best, or at least she hoped it was for the best, but she also knew that she would miss Alex. As she cried over her new sketches for the trains she wanted to add to this, she felt a familiar hug. Alex would hug her like that, giving her a slight amount of pressure on her right shoulder from her hand, and a lot more on her left shoulder from her chin. Moredo thought it was a memory, or even a hopeful wish at first, but then she heard Alex's sweet voice, healthy and free from pain for the first time in a long time. I think your sketches look amazing. You were always such a fantastic engineer. I love what you made for me, and I would love to see how you continue to add to me, she whispered to Moredo. Alex's hand held Moredo's for just a minute before Moredo continued to sketch, both hands guiding the city together, the two together once again creating a life and a place for each other. Together once again, Alex is healthy now, and now a part of Moredo's greatest work, and now they would grow together in the city of Dis, a necropolis made for two, soon to be the home for many.